Welcome to another episode of Equity Mates, a podcast where we explore what's possible in the world of investing. If you've just joined us for the very first time, you're in for an absolute cracker of an episode today. My name is Bryce, and as always, I'm joined by my equity buddy, Ren. How are you going?
I'm very good, Bryce. Very excited for this episode. How can you not be when we've got this guest in the studio with us? We didn't start talking about property. We were a stock market podcast, but over the journey, we've been bitten by that bug that's bitten generations of Australians, and we're learning more and more about property.
Yep.
But when we want to learn about property, there's one man we turn to.
That is right. The one and only Sam Gordon. Welcome to the show.
Boys, pleasure to be back as always. Thanks for having me.
Sam is the founder of Australian Property Scout and host of Scouting Australia podcast and the freshly launched 1% podcast. Congratulations.
Thank you, boys. Appreciate it. It's good. Something a little bit different, and I've been enjoying it, man. So thank you. Appreciate
Property
it.
Empire, now media empire.
We'll see. It's not the intention, but it's a little bit of a passion project, actually.
Next generation's Mark Boris.
Yes.
We'll see, mate. We'll see.
So in today's episode, we have two big kind of questions for Sam. The first is, how do we know when a boom is ending in the property market? And then we're going to turn our attention to renovations and how we can understand where there's true value when it comes to renovating a property and what we can be doing to add some value to our places. So
excited, boys.
It's a meaty topic.
100%.
It'll be big.
Juicy ones for sure.
Yeah.
Let's start with the boom because I think for people who haven't been paying too much attention, the story in some of the smaller capital cities, Brisbane, Adelaide, and in particular Perth, has been pretty wild. So give us the context of what's happened there, and then we'll talk about, is a boom ending and how you manage it.
Yeah, man, it's been a crazy run. If you look at kind of even pre-COVID, those markets sort of started to, well, actually Adelaide in particular, funnily enough, the smallest of the three started to kick pre-COVID. And then COVID really kicked Brisbane into gear, and a lot of southeast Queensland where people were, especially people from Sydney and Melbourne, migrating up there. And then Perth kind of kicked on around about a year after that as well, because they had the very strict border closures. As soon as they kind of opened up properly, the market was on just because of the crazy affordability that was there at the time, lifestyle, all the rest of the stuff, a lot of work opportunities there too. And yeah, man, like the last 3, 4, 5 years has been absolutely crazy there. Probably specifically the last 3 to 4 years, which is typically what we see in terms of a time frame of a really rapid boom and a really big boom. And if you look at history, almost always markets, they run in troughs for 10 to 15 years, and then they'll double or more in typically a 3, 4, 5 year window, which is pretty much exactly what we're seeing play out there. Last year alone, Perth, by the end of the year, when we got to the end of I think we're talking about this next week when we're doing all the data, but it finished just under 20% a year on year for growth. I think by Q3, it was sitting at 26% over the course of the year as well. So there's just been some massive runs. I think Brisbane and Adelaide both sat around about 15% for last year, but the years before they were sitting at 20-25%, and they have been year on year, and that's city-wide. When you actually drill down into some LGAs and some councils, I just sold a property. I'm going through literally a sale of a property right now that I bought in 2022 for $260. That I just sold for $620,000. So it's just been some crazy. And when you look at the isolated incidents of some of these councils, mate, crazy, 150, 160% growth at some suburb levels. It has been wild.
So you said there, it goes through a trough for 10, 15 years and then doubles in 4 or 5 years.
Typically, yeah.
It sounds like Perth at least, or some of these cities have doubled.
Yes.
Or more than that, yeah.
Yeah. Again, it depends on the LGA and it's being the council, right? And local government area being LGA. And so often what we witness is typically the top end of the market doesn't quite have as much growth because of the price point where it's already at and the demand that it's typically always at. That might sit at, say, even if you look at Sydney in 2013, 2017, when people say Sydney doubled, most of those premium markets saw about 70 to 80% worth of growth, and your lower end areas actually typically saw 100, 120 plus. So that's what we've sort of seen there. And as a citywide average, most of all three of those capitals have doubled. I've got deals in Adelaide that have tripled in an 8-year window. It's been absolutely wild. Some of these smaller capitals, because they sat in the doldrums for so long. They were so affordable. Incomes had risen a lot during that time frame as well, and their money just got so cheap that it was just a natural precursor to have that size of the boom that it's had.
So Sam, after spending 18 months with you, I'm probably going to tap your services at some time.
You said that last time. Yeah, I know. We're talking about it.
Is there anything left?
100%. No, man, 100%. Like it's actually a really interesting question that I get asked a lot. And in particular, even when Perth was coming to an end, they're like, well, where's left? Because like a lot of my clients had already doubled their money in Brisbane and Adelaide. They're like, well, where's left? And a lot of those areas will turn into regional markets. And if you look at, there's a lot of regional markets last year. They did 30% growth last year. They actually outperformed Perth, Brisbane, Adelaide, like a lot of these regional markets that are still shaping up for consistent run heading into this year and next year as well. But yeah, man, there's always places. I know we talked about Melbourne a bit last year as well. I think Melbourne will be a really interesting one to watch. It's still bottoming, but that market's tightening up a lot. It's still very affordable. It again will be very much pocket specific, because what we analyze and what we really love to understand before we get into an area is an affordability to income ratio. And you always have like a house price to income ratio, which is your affordability metric. And you always would have heard me almost every potty last year. I reference it all the time because it's so important. And there's areas in Perth that are slowing now that are sitting at the same metrics as to where Melbourne is now and where a lot of Melbourne is now. So a lot of people are like, oh, well, Melbourne's going to boom. But you've got to understand that the actual intimate suburb level and council area level in terms of how much affordability is there to actually see that growth run.
So that's interesting. So you're saying Melbourne's going down, and some of them are hitting similar affordability metrics to Perth,
which is like at a top. Yeah, near a top.
So I guess the question then becomes, like, do you think those areas of Perth can keep running to get to where Melbourne was before it started falling? Is that,
man,
so that's not over?
That's the $1 million question, because it's
literally in some cases.
And we're 100%, bro. And like, this is the thing that we have actually struggled with a little bit, because affordability metrics hit a point where we always pull out, right? And like where we're comfortable and we've had a certain amount of growth and we don't really want to, for one, keep putting clients in there. But then at the same time, sometimes you look at these metrics and you're like, well, like there still looks like there's juice in the tank, but there are other areas that are presenting better opportunities. So it's kind of always weighing that up and then weighing up, well, how realistic is it for a suburb to go from, like some of these areas we entered for 350 grand that have doubled, how realistic is it for them to triple and then hit like $1 million? And the realistic answer is, if the heat stays in the market, it is possible. But buyer sentiment and market sentiment has a lot to do with that. I think what happens with the interest rates is going to have a lot to do with that. And yeah, man, market movements. And I think like one of the really interesting things is, and something that I love about the property market is, every region will specifically be different. You know what I mean? And different drivers, and then different affordability. Like, because what's affordable in Melbourne compared to what's affordable in Perth, there is probably more of a want to live in Melbourne, especially by when people migrate to Australia. It's got the biggest immigration numbers in the country, but then funnily enough, internal migration, Perth's got the biggest numbers. So it's like there's so many things to actually weigh into the equation as to how far something has to run. When you look at Perth, something that's going to be really interesting to watch, we've seen a fair bit of investor pull out, not so much sales, but pull out of buying, right? That's eased up a lot. But we're seeing now a pickup in first home buyers entering the market, because they're no longer competing with 50 investors on a property. They're competing with 10 other first home buyers. So now all of a sudden we're seeing this shift come back in of actual home buyers. Now, who typically pays the most when they buy a property? Home buyers and first home buyers that don't understand it. They get, more FOMO.
Emotional.
Yeah. And so like we're seeing this really interesting transition now, but the, again, $1 million question will be, how far can it go? How far will it go? And what happens with interest rates, which will, again, every time there's a little cut, it increases their affordability, increases their buyer sentiment. So it's going to be really interesting to watch these things play out in terms of making decisions when to potentially exit markets and when we think they're going to taper off.
Now, I just want to defend first home buyers, because Bryce said they were emotional and you said they get caught by FOMO. There is also that they're not just purely thinking about it as an investment asset, and they're thinking about it as a lifestyle. So
for sure. But I mean, that's
sometimes a rational choice for them to pay more.
But that's the point. It's a different mindset, man. I honestly, dude, nothing. Obviously, my first property was as a first home buyer as well. It wasn't as from an investment mindset, but it is it is something to throw into the mix when you're considering a market. You need to understand who's buying in that market, which will be driven typically, and in a peak of a market as well. Investors get FOMO too, especially like people who don't know what they're doing. They'll get, if anything, they get crazy FOMO as well, probably at the same level as first home buyers. If they don't, that may be their first or second investment as well. So it's understanding who's there in the marketplace. And I think like the important thing is like, investor sentiment can change a market very quickly, whereas something like a home buyer sentiment, if people want to genuinely buy a home to live there, they're more inclined to keep looking for the opportunity to buy. Whereas investors, if they think a market's done, you'll see them move out in droves. So that will it will determine how long a market will move for, how much a potential pullback will be there on the cards, and how big a potential pullback will be as well. And there's so much to understand there within that, and track it and understand it when you're determining on pulling out in the market.
And so because you're seeing investors not pulling out of properties in Perth, but pulling out of buying, is that another signal that Perth might be...
There's definitely a slowdown. It's not a full pullout. I even know some big buyers agencies that are still buying there now. I personally am not comfortable putting clients in there at this point, considering how much growth we've had and where the affordability metrics are sitting. But there definitely is still activity, but it's slowing. And so the biggest things you got to look at when you're looking at a market and looking at buying, especially in terms of a sellout point, if you're going to exit a market, flipping effectively or trading, it's supply. So you want to watch supply. That's probably your biggest thing, and obviously versus demand, the two biggest indicators of what's going to happen with pricing. But if supply starts blowing out by a big amount, it's something you really got to keep an eye on, or especially if it starts easing off. And supply can never sit at the levels that a boom sits at for the whole period of time, but it depends on whether you want to try and catch that last full wave of growth, that last full year of growth, or whether you want to hedge your bets that, maybe miss out on the absolute top, but then maybe not also miss the top.
Yeah.
So it's very much in line with that, and sometimes you have to really track stock on market, how quickly it's increasing before you make that decision. Perth's an interesting one because if you look at Perth on average, listings used to sit at 11 to 12,000 listings across the whole city was considered like a balanced market, like just a stable market, not doing anything, buying, like days on market were 60 days on market. Like it was a very flat market, but that was the conditions at the time when we entered. When the market was at its absolute peak, it went from circa 12,000 to like 3,000 to 3,500 listings.
Wow.
So stock on stock was down like 300%. It was crazy, right? Like so tight, it's not funny. We've blown back out to around about 4,500 to 5,000. So we're still like massively down on the long-term averages, but it just depends how much that keeps tracking up and where days on market is. Days on market is absolute lowest. We're sitting at about 8 days on market across the whole city.
Wow.
We're sitting at about 11 to 14 now. So it's still tight. Like it's still growing, but it is definitely, we're on the cooling end. It's still in growth. We're on the cooling end. It just depends how long someone wants to hold in there for in terms of maximizing a market. And again, the crazy thing will be what happens with interest rates, because if we do see, and I'm not saying it's going to happen, but if we do see a % cut over the next 12 to 18 months, that's going to bring a lot of people back into the market, home buyers that weren't able to buy the last few years when it was so hectic, and that may give it another little kick as well. So many things to really look at with this.
God, I don't want to see another percentage rate cut just for what it will mean for house prices. Yeah. So I think we've spoken about a few factors there. Affordability is the biggest one, and you can look at median salaries to median house prices in a certain area to sort of get a gauge of that.
Yes.
You've explained supply, and I think that Perth example is a great example of how you can track supply.
Yeah.
Demand, especially investor demand, is kind of the big variable there. Like that's really elastic and that'll move.
Yeah.
Are there any other factors that are sort of top of mind when you...
Probably, your more macroeconomic influences as well. There's something big coming into an area that's either going to potentially push it or keep pushing it. That's things to take into consideration. Like if we look at Brisbane, everyone's talking about the Olympics. That's still 7 years away, and the market's more than doubled in the last 3 to 4 years as well. So how much of an impact will that really have? And I think that's something to really think about, because Perth, Brisbane, Adelaide, they're all acting the same way right now. Stock is starting to pick up a bit. Days on markets are going out a little bit. The market has slowed. Still in growth, but it has slowed. So it really depends what else is going on there that could potentially keep pushing it. The other big macro influential piece is obviously interest rates. And I agree with you boys that I don't think it will go to that level. We don't have a crystal ball in terms of telling exactly what's going to happen. I think by the end of this year, you'll be able to make a pretty clear assessment on what you would want to do with, say, properties in those 3 capital cities. If they do keep coming back faster than the 3 of us think they might, then it may be potential to hold a bit longer, because there will be natural stimulus and flow from that. If they don't, and if Michelle Bullock keeps saying that it's going to be further and further out, we're not cutting aggressively all the rest of it, you'd be having probably a better look at selling on this side of the end of year.
So Sam, a lot of that was using examples of Perth.
Yes.
What about the 2 others that have had pretty incredible runs of late, Brisbane and Adelaide?
Mate, I look at them in a very, very similar boat. They kind of started running at the same time. They've had similar growth rates. both of them are seeing elevated levels of stock. Demand is still good. Realistically, in all three cities, demand is still pretty good, but it definitely is picking up. The rate of growth is slowing. If we look at the quarterly data from the quarter ending in December versus the full 12 months, we're talking all three of those capitals sat circa on either side of 2% growth rate for the quarter, and they were sitting at between about 15 to 20% for the year. So you're talking about 8% annualized versus that 15 to 20% annualized. So it definitely is slowing. Still in growth, but it is slowing. So it really is, with investors out there, anyone that already holds property there, and this is the way I always assess a market and what you should be doing in your own portfolio. Do you need that money now to keep moving forward? Like, would that be the needle mover for you to be able to get into, say, 2 or 3 more deals if you were to exit something now? Or can you still do 1, 2, 3 deals now and hold that thing and try and hold it for the longer piece as well? And they're the two things that I'd be tossing up. And they're the conversations we're having with our clients at the moment, to be assessing that side of things. But right now, that they are still in a rate of growth. It just really depends on each investor's individual circumstance as to how much further they want to hold into the cycle.
And so these have been cities that have done well from a capital growth point of view.
Yep.
But when you're thinking about your portfolio, you've also got those cash deals. Are these the cities that have been good for cash deals as well, or?
Yeah, I mean, cash flow, Adelaide's probably the only one outside of it because cash flow, we did a lot of cash flow deals in both Brisbane and Perth because you could do your granny flats. And they changed the laws 12 months ago in Adelaide that you can as well. The issue was build prices had gone through the roof and values had gone through the roof. So there's so much yield compression, it no longer made sense. But if you had done cash flow deals in specifically like 2021 to even 2023 in either Brisbane or Perth, the rental growth in those cities, Perth went up by about 60-70%, like rental growth. It's crazy. Wow. And Brisbane went up by about 50% in that time frame as well. It was the massive immigration policies, like so much population just had this crazy impact on the rental market. And so, yeah, we saw almost all of our rents go through that huge spike, which helped because interest rates went up by 4.25% in the same window, which was a huge blowout of what holding cost people were expecting. So it just effectively helped balance the books on where a lot of people's interest repayments went as well.
So Sam, those 3 capital cities still growing but slowing. Melbourne is falling, but not there yet. Sydney affordability metrics are stretched. So where's an investor to go?
I think like right now as well, and especially even throwing Melbourne in the mix, man, Melbourne I think is definitely bottoming. So it was falling last year, it fell last year. Most of regional Vic did as well. Some of Melbourne and regional Vic locations fell by like 10 to 15% last year, but it was a bottoming piece in the cycle. We have seen a lot of stocks sort of dry up in those areas too. We haven't seen it move into a rate of growth yet, but it is sitting in a decent position. So I think that's kind of like there's a lot of opportunity there if you know sort of where to look. And again, you take those metrics, everything we were talking about before, you start to apply those at a suburb level and a council level, and it should give you some hunting grounds to work within as well. Sydney, I wouldn't be looking at. Canberra's an interesting one. It's always got a certain level of sort of demand on as well. But I think like a lot of growth that we're going to see in the next like 1 to 2 years before anything else really shapes up. A lot of it's going to come from the regions. Even in WA, like there's still some regionals because your regions on the, let's say drivable, commutable distance or even a livable distance from a capital city as well. Man, they always see that flow-on effect once a capital city has a run. Like even look at Sydney and then, Newcastle, the Highlands, Wollongong, they all started growing in like 2014 instead of 2013. Like there was that year flow-on before people started going. It almost is like that knock-on, that ripple effect. And so even if you look at Perth, places like Bunbury to the south and Geraldton to the north, like they've had pretty good year last year and the year before, but they're like 1 to 2 years in as opposed to being like 4 years in. And like a lot of regional Queensland is still absolutely firing. I think Vic in general, like the whole market has kind of gone through a bottoming. So I think there's some opportunities there. But there's also some red flags with some vacancy rates and things like that too. So you just got to be really aware of what a specific market is presenting. Do your DD on it. But yeah, they're the 3 that I'd sort of be having a good look at from that perspective.
So Sam, we want to turn to renovating.
Yes.
And this really came from the last full episode we did. We'll include a link in the show notes that people can listen to where we unpacked your property journey.
Yeah.
And I think one of our biggest takeaways from it was how active your property investing is, because we chat on the podcast or you hear about property investing on the news, and a lot of it gives a sentiment of like buy and let the market do its thing and then either sell or just buy and hold.
Very passive, right?
Yeah. But you were talking about like maxing out your
Camping
holidays
in the
from work,
backyard.
pitching a tent in the backyard, and just hiring
concreting driveways.
hiring a local, not even a tradie, just a handyman.
YouTube
him an hourly rate,
structural retaining walls.
Yeah.
Walls in.
Yeah, doing that garden
Yeah.
without permission. Like there was so much stuff that it was like, okay, so it is actually quite active. And I think, you know, we've got a lot of friends that could only get in on the Sydney property market where we live, like right at the bottom. But the idea was you get something and you renovate it, and that's how you add value.
Yeah, 100%.
So we want to pick your brain on the active side of property investing and renovating. Well, I guess first of all, is that a fair takeaway? Like our conclusion from your episode, do you agree with that?
Mate, I'll actually say I don't agree with it.
Okay.
Oh, nice.
My side, yes. So for me, I had very little. I was just running through. I was like, oh man, I'm gonna get smashed here because I'm gonna go the other way. But man, most of our investors, like 95% of our clients, don't want to take on renovations, and it's completely fine. And especially in this current environment, it's hard to especially outsource people doing renovations for you as well. For myself, like the takeaway 100%, my journey was very active, but I was a very low income earner. So like for me to spend time away from work and do renovations and just work ahead and then go renovate a property, I'd make like 30, 40 grand uplift on a renovation, which was half of my yearly salary at the time. So it made a lot of sense for me to do it at that point. I was also young, wasn't super tied down with other things as well, and just kind of had that ability to do it. If anyone kind of heard that episode and then thought that's the only way to scale a portfolio, it's definitely not the case. I'm actually, if I look at like my journey now, much more intelligent investor compared to what I was when I was specifically in my early and mid 20s, where I thought that those hard yards are what was necessary to do it. Market timing, like you'd see with what we're talking about here, will every day of the week kill someone's ability to renovate or develop. Yes, if you do those in rising markets, you're going to get the extra bit of juice on top, but it's definitely not like a 100% necessity to do it. And most people these days are very busy, don't have that time. If you've got a family, like it's a lot of things to try and factor in. I definitely have still got clients that pack up the suitcase and they flew to Perth for a couple of weeks to fix everything up. But I think it's like a cost versus return analysis on your time, and then outsourcing it as well and seeing if it really makes sense. But yeah, it's the other thing to throw into the equation is not everyone wants to scale a portfolio the way I did in my especially my early to mid 20s, where I was doing a lot of those works. Because it was, I really wanted to push it super hard, and I was making so much more from my property portfolio than I ever did from a job as well. So for me, it was a no-brainer, but it's definitely not like a must-do. It's a great strategy, and especially for, like you're saying, for people who've bought their own homes locally and they might be a bit run down and like how to fix them up. There's definitely some really good, quick, easy wins you can have in this game as well. So I hope I didn't kill your segment too much. But
I think the takeaway is if you have the time and capability, then there is value to be added. And I think for two guys sitting here who've never done a renovation but probably have desires to do one or think they can do one, a lot of YouTube videos to be watched.
It's something that I think like anyone that like loves investing, I would say do a renovation in your lifetime. Don't go in with like beer goggles, raise your red goggles. It's not a walk in the park.
I've seen enough grand designs to know that it's always over time and always over budget.
100%.
But there's obviously a spectrum or a scale, and we want to go through a bit of a 101 here and start with, like, in your view, what is like the best thing you can do to add value, and that's either like full knockdown, rebuild, start again, through to like a lick of paint. You buy the apartment and throw the paint on. So where do you kind of see the best sort of value?
And I think for us, in terms of how we define value, it's like cost in versus price uplift.
Yes. Of course.
Bathroom, bedroom.
The biggest thing I'm going to preface this with is, if anyone wants to do this themselves, the biggest mistake that people make, they go to do it themselves, and then they do it after work, on the weekends. They do they try and fit it in around everything. And I've had clients that I can specifically think of a client over in Perth that did it this way. And I told him, man, take a week or 2 weeks off, smash the whole thing out, just be done with it, get it listed, get it rented. And he thought he could kind of do it himself on weekends. And he's like, no, I'll get it all in. Exactly as Bryce said there, man, everything goes over time. Nothing ever goes like perfectly to plan. And the biggest mistakes I ever made doing this side of things was doing things, trying to fit things around it. And the biggest mistake I've seen other people do is that as well. If you're genuinely going to take a renovation on, especially a cosmetic reno, scope out how long you think it will genuinely take to do it. Probably double that, because that's realistic. That's probably realistic, especially if you've never done it before. Things take longer than you think, and things come up that you didn't think were going to come up. And set that time frame and then just do everything you can in that time frame. And then if it goes over, I'd get someone else in to finish it off, especially if it comes from an investment perspective. Because if you don't finish it off and then you've got to go back to work, that those 2 weeks, 1 or 2 weeks or however long you put into it, will all of a sudden blow out to another 1 or 2 months. And it's honestly the biggest thing. If this is an investment, for every week you're out of the market, like you're killing dollars in terms of rent that could be coming in with it. And especially you could be in a tight rental market that potentially wanes a little bit as well over if it took you an extra 1, 2, 3 months. So that's really the biggest thing I would preface with is go in like super clear vision on what you want to do. Be as clear as you can be with the timeframes, and don't kid yourself with it. Everyone who's tried to do this has made that mistake before. Like, one lesson to take away from it, just be really honest with yourself how long you think it will take, throw a bit of fat on that, and then if you're going to do it, get stuck in and don't try and fit it in around other things.
So with that caveat in mind,
yes.
We want to know the answer to Bryce's question, because he's trying to plan out what room he should get first.
All right.
Okay. So give us your
biggest bang for bucks. Okay, easy. The biggest bang for bucks: flooring, paint, and then fixtures and fittings, and external facade. Someone pulls up that's the biggest one that everyone forgets. They do everything inside, and then you rock up and it looks like a piece of shit. And you're like, everyone just like rocks up. Yeah, keep going. You know what I mean? You won't even get people in the door.
Yeah.
So the external one is also typically a really easy fix, because even if you have a house and let's say there is a fair bit of work to do on it, I mean, even just like cleaning up the front yards and giving it a lick of paint can just completely change how a house looks. And I've seen a lot of people that, like, it might be an old fibro shack, and so they'll just clad the front of the house. They can't afford to do the whole thing, just clad the front, because that's what everyone sees, right? Especially if they're tight fences. You don't even see the front, and sometimes you see the back. So they just clad the front, sometimes the back, like that's it. And I've seen it happen all the time. But like, especially most tenants will never even notice or see, right? Yeah. Things like that external, pull up, what do I see when I walk in? That's super important. The paint and the carpets or the floorings are a really big one, because when you walk into a house, a lot of the time I used to buy like old ex-rentals that have been rentals for 10, 15 years, and the people hadn't spent anything on them, right? And if you walk into them, a lot of the time, ex-rental might have gone through a lull period during that time frame in terms of the market. They might have had to get whoever they could get in there. Undoubtedly, at some point, they've had a smoker in there, right? Especially in the last 10 to 15 years. Cigarette smoke sinks into the walls, and it sinks into the carpet and the floors. So if you're wanting to like a quick win on that front, now if you're in a nice area, or if you don't have that, if you bought something that's got new car, you may not have that side of things. But 9 out of 10 properties that are a bit older, run down, maybe you're buying something that's a bit beat up, you're getting it at a good price because of it. They're your 2 quick wins that immediately visually brighten up the place, make it look heaps nicer. If you've got floorboards underneath, you might rip the carpets up, sand and polish them if they're in good nick, and if they're nice floorboards, give it a lick of paint. Immediately the smell changes. So if someone will walk into a house and it's almost like it's brand new, and it's a complete game changer. Especially if you're going to sell, it's huge. And sometimes we'll work this into a strategy where we might buy a property, think there's 3 years left in a market to run, and it needs like some basic works. And like, if you can avoid doing it now and rent it now and get away with 2-3 years now, do that before you sell it. Because when you do it before you sell it, it hasn't had a tenant in there for 2 to 3 years to kind of, potentially funk it up a little bit in that time frame. And so, man, it can be a really good little strategy from that perspective as well. So they're your 2 probably biggest things internally. Obviously that facade. And then the other big one is your fixtures and fittings. Light fittings, like you walk into something from the 60s, 70s, 80s or older, and just like you look at the old light fitting, you're like, man, this thing, it just looks old, right? You can change those really cheaply these days. You can do a really cheap fix. If they've got a bayonet style fitting, you can unscrew it. You screw something in from Bunnings, it costs $10. It literally can completely change it. Or you can go a little bit further, put something a little bit nicer in. I would be wary of doing downlights unless you're in like your obviously house is nicer in a better area and stuff. Your return for putting downlights in could be worthwhile, because versus like trying to upgrade a fitting, or if it's a really old home and you can't just do a bayonet fit change or something like that, downlights could be worthwhile in more expensive areas. But if you're in affordable areas, like downlights are a big no-no, because you're just not going to get the return on it. People aren't going to walk in and go, yeah, I'll pay an extra 50 grand for this thing because you've got downlights throughout. So you really need to weigh up the cost versus return on that side. Door handles. So when I say fixtures and fittings, you got your lights, your door handles. They're your 2 biggest cheap wins. And then the other big one, by even going into bathrooms and stuff, like if you starting to go that little bit, can I put a nice little vanity in there, little Bunnings vanity? Again, you walk in, completely changes it compared to the little stone one that's 30, 40, 50 years old, or like, you know, plastic one or pink one, whatever, you know. All these little things, it's visual, right? When you walk in, what's visually or emotionally someone going to go, oh, I don't like it because of that. You want to take those things out of the equation. And sometimes my biggest wins I used to have was changing all of those items. And then I'd look at a kitchen and go, a kitchen or a bathroom, and go, how can I do a cheap fix and a cheap win on this? The vanity side of things is really important for the other one, for the bathroom. I can completely change it. Sometimes changing like a really old crappy light in there, and putting like a little IXL bloody fan heater light installed for a couple $100, repainting it new vanity. Sometimes you can get if you're going to sell it, you can get the tile paint, and you just can completely change it, you know. And for $1,000, $1,500, if you're doing some of that work yourself, unless you're a Sparky, don't try and change I've zapped myself a few times trying to do stupid things like that. But yeah, like those sorts of things. Really good, cheap, easy wins for a bathroom. You don't need to spend like 15 to 20 grand ripping the whole thing out. Yeah. What can you do for $1,000, $2,000 that might bump it 10, 20 grand? Because you put 15 to 20 grand into it, you have to be able to get, like, realistically for me to spend that amount, you'd have to be getting like minimum 40, 50 grand a return on it. Because like 1 to 2,000 and getting an extra 10, 20 grand val, that's a 10x, right? So I'd be looking at those things. And then to go back to the kitchen, look at a kitchen. So often kitchens are actually salvageable. And so we'll go in, and again, if we're planning to hold it for 3 to 5 years, but the kitchen is terrible, well, what could we do with it to give it a facelift to get us through the next few years? And then maybe if it's worthwhile, if it's in an owner-occupied area, maybe we replace it just before we sell it if it's still pretty beat up at that time. But the first property I ever bought, my little 2-bedroom unit in Wollongong, the carcass of the kitchen was fine. Like so the actual, the framing and everything of it, and the doors and everything was sweet. But it was like an old cream color with like a beveled edge. There was like a timbered bevel edge around it. It was like a 1994 build. I bought it in 2009, so it was like 15 years old at the time. But by the time I did this at about early 2010. So it was maybe close to 20 years old at the time. Still in great nick. And I went in there, mate. I got a tin of. It was a primer. It was an enamel-based primer and an enamel-coated paint. And there's it's like a foam rolling brush. Like it feels like it's not like a proper paint roll. It's like this little foam rolling brush. Put a layer of base coat on it, 2 top coats, and you tap this. And it literally looks like it's like a brand new one of those, like straight out of like Bunnings or a kitchen store or something like that. And the other way to absolutely win at this strategy, if you're able to retain it and use that, is get some of those get whatever's the most in, whenever someone's listening to this podcast, what is the most in and fashionable looking door handle? And sometimes that's just a stainless steel, or at the moment, it could just be, the
Where
black
do you
ones.
find that info?
Oh man, dude, go to Pinterest and go like nicest kitchens on the market. Nicest kitchens. Yeah. Bang, you'll get 50 pop up. Yeah. You'll have 2 of almost exactly the same. Will be that constant reference point for you to go off. Man, I used to go to Bunnings. I'd get a 30 pack of stainless steels for $10. Sorry, I'd get a 10 pack for $30, so $3 a handle. I'd do my whole kitchen with it. And man, it cost me that. It cost me like $100 for the paint and primer of the enamel coat, and the kitchen would look completely different for $150, $200. You need to wear a face mask with that enamel stuff. It's brutal. But like, yeah, I used to like tie this. Like I tie like a cloth around my face because it was brutal.
Between zapping yourself and enamel, I reckon you're taking years off your life with these renovations.
Hopefully, I've passed the lessons on to the Equity Mates listeners, so they don't have to cop it. But honestly, man, like I should send you boys some before and afters of like way it looked before and then how it looked after. And mate, it honestly looks like a brand new kitchen. When I first did it, I didn't know about tile paint, and that's the only thing I could have gone in there and just painted all those tiles that were at the back, which were like they were like a creamy or a light brown or something as well. You could literally get a tin of tile paint again for $50, paint that whole thing. It would have looked like a brand new kitchen, you know? Yeah. So like these sorts of things, these cheap, easy wins like that, just putting a bit of graft in there. Yeah. And you can save some serious dollars.
I would love to get Sam to walk through both of our places and just be like, what are the things that he can say? Yeah.
You want to do it? You want to do it?
Benches.
I'll do it, man. 100%. I'll show you your cheap wins and then the cheap wins versus the big ones.
Bryce's cigarette stained carpets.
Do you actually?
No. No, so when I bought mine,
you got me there. You got me good.
It was when I bought mine is exactly what you were saying. Like, well, they'd actually just finished a facelift reno.
Okay.
Hadn't no like knocking down walls or anything like
Yep.
that, but it was fresh carpet,
Yep.
fresh paint,
Yep.
new roof. Actually, the facade was all done, so it was like the widest one in the street.
So all the things that I
all the
said,
things you
yeah.
said they had done, and
Okay.
it definitely made it different. Like
Yep.
the carpet was spongy and it smelt great,
Yep.
and it just it felt.
It's an emotional thing, right?
Yeah,
When you walk in,
yeah.
you're like, oh yeah, I could live in this place. It's clean. It smells good. It looks good.
Yeah.
It's shiny.
So what about the flip side? Those were most bang for your bucks.
Yes.
Where are the value traps?
The biggest value traps. So it's think of it as exact opposite to what you want to do when Bryce walks into a home to make him and the wife happy to buy this thing, right? The emotional things that you can see that make you feel good about the place. The things to be very wary of spending your money on is the complete other side of that. The things you can't see that like you don't really know if they're even good or bad or anything, because when people don't know about it, they're really not gonna pay extra for it, right? Probably some of the biggest things. The biggest one is wiring. So people are like, oh, rewire the whole house because like it's it's fully compliant and it's all good and all the rest of it and like all these sorts of things. It's just like, and rewiring house is like 20 to 30 grand,
Yeah.
and you can't see it. Yeah, you put 20 to 30 grand in. You can do all the things that I spoke about, plus probably throw a dishwasher in, everything. You could do everything for 20, 30 grand. People walk in and think like it's a brand new house. But I see heaps of people burn cash on rewirings because they're going to go to so many people, they think they're going to go to the full extent of renovating this house to the fullest thing. So what's the first thing you have to do? You have to do your plumbing and wiring to be able to handle all this stuff you want to put in it. And yeah, man, it's typically the biggest money pit is from that side. The other side of things, man, is going over the top with things like kitchens and bathrooms and things like that. So again, those lipstick jobs that we're talking about of just cosmetically giving something a facelift that might raise it by 10 to 20 grand, but then you might spend 20 just to get an extra 30. So for an extra $15,000 worth of work, you might get an extra $10,000. And so it's always cost first return. And if you're going to sell a property, I'd always have a chat to a real estate agent about this, like what's really worthwhile. If you're just doing it from a valuation perspective to pull the equity out, so often just that cosmetic facelift is all you need to do to get that uplift. So again, it really depends on your target market. If you're going to sell and an agent says to you, if you put Caesarstone bench tops in, you put waterfalls in, you spend 30 grand, 40 grand on this kitchen, you'll get an extra 100,000 over the facelift one because there's certain buyers, a certain demographic in this market that will pay it for that, then it's worthwhile doing. But it's always figuring it out. But the biggest mistake you see is they go put that in the cheap house, in the doldrums of Brisbane or something, and yeah, man, they don't get the return on it. So it's overspending, thinking that, oh yeah, well, I would love to have this in my home, and it really not getting the same return, especially in something that would be more like an investment grade suburb.
What about things like solar?
Yeah, not worth it.
Not
worth it. Re-roofs, almost always not worth it unless you absolutely have to do it. Personally, I would prefer to take something to market. If the roof was stuffed, take it to market, let someone negotiate me down on the roof, because roofs these days like minimum 30 grand, and you could probably just go, you could patch it. I'll get quotes here to patch it and fix it and make it livable for 5 grand. I would almost always prefer to do that. But yeah, solar, roofs, those sorts of things. If it's
Tubs.
Hot tubs? Are you trying to justify a purchase here, Bryce?
No, we're long term.
I mean, again, it's always what you're going for, right? Like it's if we're talking a few $1 million for a house, and the market would pay an extra 50 grand, 100 grand to have a hot tub and a sauna room and all that sort of stuff. It's understanding the target market. But from an investment perspective, almost always all those lifestyle sort of plays, they're not worth it.
So we've had you in the position of home owner
Yes.
or investor in this case.
Yep.
Now I want to flip you around
Yep.
and make you the inspector.
Okay.
So you're walking into a place that has maybe had a few touch-ups. The real estate agent's giving you the song and dance about how much work's been put into it.
Yeah.
Like what are you looking out for when you're inspecting a place to potentially buy as like potentially a bit of a trap or something where they've put lipstick on something that is not too good underneath?
Man, I think if are we talking mainly from a value perspective to make sure you're getting good value?
Yeah. And
Not
not
being
being
ripped off.
tricked, I
Okay,
guess. Not
okay.
being tricked by the facelift.
Yeah.
It's a shitty facelift.
Okay, so there's three, they sound like a bit of pain there, mate. You're not,
No.
Well,
I
I'm only
reckon you
joking.
can go into some and be like, wow, this sucks.
Yeah, right.
They've
Yeah,
tried-
100%.
They've tried here and, whew.
Yeah.
Well, I haven't been. I don't think this really falls under this category, but I haven't had hot water for about a week because the hot water system is so busted. We've had 2 plumbers out there, and like the circuit board isn't working, so they have to get a circuit board from Japan, but the model's too old, and so now we've got to get the whole thing replaced.
Okay.
And now this is my first experience of the joys of being a homeowner. I don't think we got tricked by that, but it's like those things.
Did you have a building and pest inspector go through it?
Yeah.
He didn't pick it up?
Oh no, it worked fine for like a year.
Okay.
And then it just blew. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So the biggest thing I would preface with this is exactly like you said, put your hat on as the inspector, right?
Yeah.
Before you buy any property, like never buy a property without doing a building and pest. Always, man, always. And I'd be asking about those key items. When someone does a building and pest inspection, they should take the photo of the age of the hot water system as well, and have a chat to them about it. And if you think, like if he goes, oh mate, it's 15 years old, it's kind of all right, but maybe it's like, man, can you put that in the report? Get him to put everything in the report that is like a semi maybe.
Just quickly on that. Most places in New South Wales, at least, you can get the building report along with the contract of sale or whatever, Jim's buildings reports or whatever. Are you saying to do your own on top of that, or?
Yeah, so the slight issue with other people doing their own one, doing their like a seller doing their own one, is they could probably try and the things that I'm talking about, trying to make sure you get included, are probably the same things that they're having a conversation about to make sure are left out of a report.
It's 15 years old. It'll be right.
It's still working now. So you know what? No worries. I'll strike that out because. Also, you can't really go back and have a go at them because it's the owner that's paid for that report, not you, right? And the other side of things is a building and pest inspector will have his claims all over those things anyway, like his clauses all over it. Disclaimers. Sorry. New South Wales is the only state that's so different from all the others because all the others you get your building and pests in your contractual periods. So normally you don't have to.
Okay.
It's the only state that you have to do it before effectively going to contract.
Yeah.
All the other states, you can effectively put it in as a clause or do it in your cooling off window, get those reports back and negotiate if required, or decide to terminate or proceed or however you want to do it, or at least have the awareness going into the deal. The biggest thing before anyone buys interstate, they should always check with like who is a solicitor or conveyancer that they're going to use, what conditions should I have in a contract, especially if you're buying and if you've only ever bought in New South Wales. It doesn't matter where you bought because every state's different. WA doesn't have cooling off period. And most people wouldn't know that. They go by and say, oh yeah, sweet, I've got this, I've got that or whatever. I've got a 5-day, 7-day, 3-day cooling off, whatever's relevant in their respective state. There's no cooling off. And building and pests are only on structurals. So you could buy a property and have 50 maintenance items that would be 50 grand and then no structurals. You can't negotiate and you can't pull out of the contract. You literally can't pull out of the contract. So you could buy it thinking it's sweet, and then there's nothing structurally wrong with it, but the whole house is nothing like they've said, and you could be really, really at risk there. So before you buy anything, if you're not using a professional to help you navigate that side of things, definitely have a chat with the conveyancer. What do I need to be aware of? What can I put in the contract to protect myself? And in Vic, like I would always leave a condition in the contract, even if you're trying to take something out and you really love something. Always have a building and pest or always have a finance clause because as you get out of jail free, so to speak. So hopefully there's probably not too many property professionals listening to this that will roast me for this. But yeah, always from the consumer side of things, always make sure you protect yourself with one or the other as a get out of jail free card in every state but New South Wales. Just to effectively have that. Yeah, have that get out card if you really need. If something pops up and you can't negotiate yourself back out of it. And you actually take negotiation completely off the table. So if you don't have that in there, you can't negotiate. So it's one of those things you definitely want to have that in the contract for, again, every state outside.
So building and pest inspection is something to look at if you're coming in. Any other key things to keep an eye on when you're
for sure. If you're going to do it for rent, if it's as an investment, I would be who's your property manager, and if you can get a property manager to go through. So again, this is what we do. So we always have building and pest inspector go through. Always have a property manager go through. I probably inspected 5,000 properties in my lifetime, right? I'm still going to look at things in a different way from the building and pest inspector, whose ass is on the line, and the property manager, whose ass is also on the line, because if they tell you a fugazi or they missed something or whatever, it's like, well, man, you went through and inspected this property for me, and like you didn't tell me that I needed that before I purchased it, so it's going to create an immediate friction. So a property manager will always look for what are all the things that I need to tell these people about that are buying this house to make sure that they get this thing done before they rent it. And that's literally, so often that's their job. Like if there's an end of tenancy, they'll go in, they'll do a bond inspection, end of lease inspection, and go, okay, these are the things you need before you relet it again. These are the things you're going to need to put in to be able to get a good tenant in a good time frame as well. So they're the two things that we always like to lean on. Now, if you don't have those relationships or you can't get anyone to go out and do it, the other thing to remember, property managers are the most underappreciated people in the whole industry. They really are, and they're the most underpaid, and they work bloody hard. So if they're not even anywhere near certain, or if they don't think you're 100% serious, you may really struggle to get someone to go out there and do it for you. Or if a market's just really hot, especially from a rental side, you may just not be able to get someone to go out and do it for you. The biggest thing I'd go in and look for, if it was outside of that, first things first, is you need to understand the value of your property. Are you valuing it against something that's had no work done? Are you valuing it against something that's a cosmetic reno, lipstick sort of style job? Or are you valuing it against something that's been fully renovated? Don't buy something not renovated and then go, oh, you know what? I think it's great value because I'm looking at these two because it's 20 grand less than a fully renovated property, because there's intrinsic value that's being missed there. So the key thing there is understand what bracket that you sit in within that, and then pretty much go and inspect it based on that. Because if you're going and inspecting an unrenovated property and you've valued it against unrenovated properties, you can go, okay, sweet. Well, these are things that I might need to do, and then pretty much make the calls, make the decisions from there. But you're buying it at that same price point. Now, if you're going in and against a fully renovated property, you've got to compare like for like. And sometimes you want to get on the phone. This is what we do. We get on the phone with real estate agents. We go, man, what was the level of finish on that bathroom and that kitchen and all the rest of it? And they might go, mate, it was an absolute dog's body. Like we airbrushed the hell out of it. Like it was actually hopeless. They might say that. And we've got the relationship with so many guys, so they'll tell us straight what it is. Or they might go, man, that was like a full top end finish. Like that thing was like elite. You'd eat your dinner off it. It was that great. And you got to understand, like when you walk in and look at yours, how are you comparatively assessed against that? But yeah, and then the ones in the middle, which is, you know, the ones that Bryce bought there, very similar to that, and that we typically will try and do for properties as well. Sometimes it's really hard for you to go in and see with your own naked eye on the quality of finish, because so often those jobs will be done by a homebody, a handyman, like, or someone trying to do it themselves. So sometimes it's really hard to actually see the actual integrity of something like that. You can go through, you can open all your doors, you can check everything, look at it all. Does it look level? Does it look decent? Do the doors open and close easily? All those sorts of things. If any sort of wiring was done, any sort of plumbing work was done, okay, sweet. Can we see the receipts from the relevant tradespeople? So it wasn't some 21-year-old Sam Gordon idiot zapping himself trying to do it. You know what I mean? Like, they're the sort of things you want to make sure, if those sorts of works have been done.
So you can ask for that. You can say, like, can we see the tradies' receipts?
Yeah.
Like,
they don't have to give it to you, but if they're trying to sell a property, it's in their benefit to show you that if they've got them, it's in their benefit to show you, licensed tradesmen carried out this work, has been done to a tradesman-like standard, because they'll typically always have their warranty periods on them too. So it's almost like it's being aware if you're going in and buying something that a home, someone at home's try to do themselves, or if a licensed tradesperson's done as well. Because again, that kind of carries a different level of value within that too, because you have more peace of mind from that. But I'd be looking for things like expiry dates on things like hot water systems as well. If something's like, legitimately, if something's like 20 years old, you can get on the phone and you go to real estate agent and go, hey man, like the building and pest guy told me these things only typically have a lifespan of 10 years. I'm going to have to get a new switchboard from Japan. Supra's got to bring it to me. So there's like, all these extra costs involved. You know what I mean? Like just, you can kind of fugazi up a bit of a story around it, and then try and negotiate a bit off to give yourself a bit of fat and a bit of buffer on that. But literally any house that you buy, regardless of whether it's the old one, the cosmetic reno, or the fully renovated, always go in mind that you need a maintenance buffer, that something's going to blow in the next 6 to 12 months, because it's almost always the case, whether a previous owner knew about it already or they didn't know about it, and it's just a 15, 20-year-old system that is what it is. So you just got to kind of go in with, try and understand as much as possible how much life. The easiest way to do this, and the way to get the most clarity, get on the phone with your building and pest inspector and ask them about everything, and especially the big items, the big ticket items as well. How's the wiring? All the AC units? How's the roof? Is there anything to look for with this? Is there any, if it's an iron roof, is there any rust? How much rust? If they're tiled roofs, like what's all the capping, ridge capping, all that sort of stuff. Like just hit them with all the questions and go through their building report and ask them. Most building and pest inspectors as well are like really receptive to it. Most people don't really care how much they look at it, whatever. Like if you get someone and you have a good chat to them about it, typically you can kind of get the, what you want out of it. the caveat on this, if they are a grumpy bastard and they don't want to give you that much time, have your key things you want to ask first. And then if they're giving you the time, run through all the other minor items, but have your key items first, like your big tickets or anything they flagged in it as well. So you can sort of price up off the back of it and potentially negotiate it off as well.
Well, heaps of information there, Sam. Thank you for that.
It was a pleasure, boys.
I think a lot for us to think about. Now,
you got me hyped up, mate. Talking about booms and busts and bloody renovations.
Well,
all G'd up.
Keep that energy because you're actually going to be back on the podcast next week. We're going to talk about sort of how the market and how prices are moving. We're going to do a quarterly property update. But if people can't wait 1 week to hear you again, they can hear you on your 2 podcasts now, Scouting Australia if they are more interested in property and property investing, or the 1%. Is it the top 1%?
The top 1%,
the top 1%. Speaking to high performers across Australia. So 2 podcasts there. And if they want to engage you and your team for buyer's agent services, they can go to Australian Property Scout. So
yeah, man, 100%.
Plenty of ways to keep in touch with Sam until he's next on Equity Mates. But Sam, thanks for joining us today.
Always a pleasure, boys. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Sam.
I will say this about investing. Everything you do learn is cumulative. What I learned at 20 is useful.